Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Team Cage left the small lumber village behind them in silence, the glowing red orb of light still hovering over the village silently, casting a chilling glow down upon it. It was fitting given the mass execution site that they had just left and they were all silent, lost in their own thoughts. For Naruto, it was still something that he was having trouble coming to terms with. From what he remembered from his life before Anbu, and there wasn't much, Naruto had experienced some of the harsher realities of life before. There had been loneliness, ostracism and sadness. People hadn't liked him very much. It had not been nice, and he would forever be grateful for the Hokage for lifting him above those feelings, molding him into a shinobi and giving him purpose and a place to belong. However, Naruto was not deluded or conceited enough to claim that his childhood had been worse than everybody else's. In his age group alone, Uchiha Sasuke had gone through a much more traumatic and horrifying experience, one that would forever linger in back of the other boy's mind. Perhaps the Uchiha would have understood better than he did. Naruto just couldn't comprehend the point of all the suffering and pain that those poor people in the village had gone through. He simply could not comprehend why somebody do something like that. Even with all of his experiences in the Anbu and working as the Hokage's assistant, it still eluded him. It kept the young Anbu quiet during their fast-paced travel to the next town. Daichi and Yuka were in the lead, the former using his Byakugan and the latter using her limited sensor skills to try and locate the enemy. It was a long shot, especially after what Daichi had reported back at the village. The tortured man had not had any chakra in his body at all, and that warehouse had emitted a kind of energy that acted as a kind of blind spot to the fabled eye techniques of the Hyuga. Naruto couldn't explain that either. Everybody, from the lowest of the academy students even civilians to the most powerful cages, knew that chakra was essential to life. Without chakra, one could not live. It was the product of physical and spiritual energy, naturally produced by all living creatures, plants, animals, humans. Even the world had natural energy, ancient chakra flows that ran deep through the earth, far out of reach by any living being. How could somebody survive without chakra? What had that strange energy been? Naruto leapt from one branch to the next, the wind rushing through his hair. As he landed, his hand had drifted up and touched his stomach as a startling realization came to him. Was that strange energy demonic? But, no, it hadn't felt anything like what Naruto briefly remembered from those hazy memories inside Anchor Vantian. Still, if anybody in Team Cage could locate the enemy, then it would have to be Daichi and Yuka. Daichi had his eyes, and the blank spots would be just as good as an indication as actually seeing them, while Yuka had the best sensing capabilities out of all of them. The human body, especially those of shinobi, expelled chakra from their tenketsu regularly. It was part of the chakra circulatory system, much like how humans exhaled carbon dioxide. Such chakra quickly dissipated into the air quickly, but it acted like a beacon to those with the talent to perceive it. Even if the enemy were not using chakra, perhaps Yuka could detect some residue of that other strange energy. Hopefully Team Cage could locate and intercept the unknown attackers before they reach the next village. At the front of the group, Daichi held up a hand and Naruto tensed. He took a deep breath as he finished his jump, shelving his thoughts, questions and emotions and landing neatly on the thick tree branch. By his body language, Daichi was looking forward intently, peering at something far beyond the range of a normal eye. With the Byakugan activated, and for the most part, Daichi could automatically see 50 meters around him. With some effort, he could extend that range and see 10 times further, although it took some chakra. There's something up ahead, Daichi murmured. Blank hazy spots in my vision, wait. He fell silent and his hands flashed. Contact, 3 to 5 contacts incoming, 450 meters and closing. The Anbu team moved back into the shadows and waited. They didn't have to wait long. For a shinobi, covering 450 meters could take less than a minute. Naruto stilled his breathing and quieted his mind. His senses were trained on his surroundings, a strange, calm clarity filling his mind. He heard them before he saw them, the faint tap of feet striking against wood and the rustle of leaves as the contacts came closer. Then, they came into visual sight and Naruto almost breathed a sigh of relief. Leaf headbands gleamed in the light of the sun as the three new leaf nin leapt through the trees. One wore the vest of a jonin, although it was torn, battered and stained with blood. The other two wore bandanas over their faces, clad in chunin vests. The lead jonin looked vaguely familiar and Naruto was sure that he had seen him before in the mission's assignment room. He sent a pulse through his tattoo possible friendlies and suddenly Cage appeared in front of them, causing them to halt. Identify. His voice was short, sharp and to the point. The jonin cocked his head, staring somewhat curiously at the Anbu. Naruto got a closer look at the jonin and a name popped in his mind. He sent a request through his tattoo, a series of chakra pulses, and Cage tilted his head fractionally. Naruto leaped forward, landing in front of the newcomers in a crouch and standing up. "You're Konoha's lion," Naruto said quietly. The name rang a bell for Cage, who nodded in recognition. "Where's the rest of your squad?" The lion had been the A-rank jonin first assigned to the region after the reports of raids and attacks had filtered through to Konoha. He had led a group of 7 chunin, a more than adequate amount of shinobi to take care of a B-ranked mission. Tall, with dark shaggy hair and a thick beard that almost looked like a lion's mane, Naruto remembered him as an intensely focused man. Now, though, he looked somewhat dazed, drenched in blood and eyeing the surroundings curiously. "You don't understand." The lion's voice was hoarse and rough, as if he had been using it too much. "What?" Naruto asked, frowning. A strange feeling was tingling in the pit of his stomach and he was beginning to feel edge and tense. He was faintly aware of the rest of Team Cage moving into position around them, readying to drop in if necessary. Cage took over the questioning, sounding faintly irritated. "Where's your squad, jonin?" he pressed. Something flickered over the lion's face and he gestured absently at the two people behind him. Naruto could hear the harsh breathing of the chunin, deep and raspy. Their eyes were fervent and bloodshot, the only things visible from behind the bandanas wrapped around their face. "Identify," Naruto commanded. "They can't talk," the lion explained. He seemed agitated, his body twitching. "They spoke only of blasphemy and the Lord decreed that they shall never speak again." He grinned rather madly. "It was a good thing," he said sagely. "Now, they understand. Where's the rest of your squad?" Cage repeated. "I will not ask again, jonin." They did not understand. The lion grinned, showing his bloody teeth. Naruto saw something caught in him, the flesh or meat of some kind of animal, and a strong aroma washed over him. He sniffed it, recognizing it almost instantly. Blood, human blood. Cage recognized it too. "Stand down, jonin," he ordered. "We've been sent to take this situation under control. You will be escorted back to the nearest garrison and questioned." The lion abruptly focused. "I can't let you do," he said thickly. He swallowed and licked his lips. "You don't understand. We will show you." With almost no warning at all, the lion demonstrated one of the techniques that had earned him his moniker. He reared up, head drawing back and roared. It was a terrible beastly roar, the roar of a lion with the power of wind behind it, and Naruto and Cage disappeared under a concussive wave of pressured air that tore them to shreds. Their bloodied husks fell to the ground and disappeared in a cloud of smoke, one from a shadow clone dispersing and the from the replacement technique. The lion did not look disappointed. In fact, a savage grin crossed his face and he motioned to his squad. "Show them," he boomed, his voice rising into the air. "Make them understand." Team Cage was already on it. The moment Cage had shown himself to the arrivals, Toa had raised his arm. The intricate and elaborate seals tattooed onto it glowed with bright scarlet light, stretching off the skin and creating a glowing, chakra-based version of something that looked like a cross between a crossbow and a tube. With Cage's escape, he let loose and fiery darts of blazing chakra shot from the contraption in his hands. They slammed into and pierced the chests of both chunin, causing them to stagger back. Then, to his surprise, the chunin righted up, seemingly unaffected. They reached for their bandanas. They unfurled them, revealing mutilated and mangled heads. One of them had been bludgeoned by something and parts of his head were caved in, while the other had been scalped and burned, her face completely destroyed. Dried blood, muck and dirt covered their wounds but no fresh blood seeped out of them. Only their eyes had been left untouched, feverish and completely insane. Naruto and Cage moved to intercept the lion, moving in tandem as they blurred forward. The lion brandished his arms and revealed the second reason why he had earned his moniker. A set of thick, jagged metal claws emerged from the back of his hand, tearing through his dirty skin. The artificial contraptions planted in his hands must have hurt, but the man showed no indication as he leapt forward, swiping madly. Naruto rolled to the right as Cage parried the blow with his dull black machete, reaching into his pouch and pulling out a set of shuriken. He threw them and made a hand sign. Shuriken shadow clone technique. 3 shuriken became 3 dozens, slamming into the lion's chest and upper arms. The lion made a loud, frantic noise, pausing for a brief moment, and that gave Cage enough time to lodge his blade in the traitorous man's chest. The man gasped, his eyes rolling back into his skull, his face slackening and becoming strangely at ease. Crouched down he was. Naruto reflexively recoiled in disgust as he saw the lion become aroused, his entire body shuddering. Then, with a wide grin, he swiped at Cage again and again. "You make me so happy," he roared. Spittle flew from his mouth. "Give it to me again." Naruto's hand blurred. He drew in a breath, released molded elemental chakra from the tenketsu in his lungs and used the tenketsu in his diaphragm and roof of his mouth to spit out a swirling sphere of compressed air. Wind chakra, depending on how it was refined, could be used as either a heavy sledgehammer or a fine scalpel. Naruto had chosen the latter, and the razor-sharp wind shredded skin and dove into the lion's knee. His leg buckled and his kneecap exploded in a shower of gore and flesh. The lion let out a shriek of ecstasy which was only cut off as Cage neatly took off his head. It bounced to the ground as the lion's body froze, and then it suddenly collapsed like a puppet with all the strings cut off. "Shit," Naruto muttered in disgust, rising up from his position. Cage stood over the body as the rest of the team finished up their fights. Despite their fearsome appearance, the Chunin had not been able to survive the blunt force of Toa's glowing, scarlet battle axe or Komaki's razor wire, and the 2 Anbu brought the bodies over, laying them next to the lion. Naruto stared down at the lion's head. "I've talked to him before," the blonde Anbu murmured. "I mean, he was an asshole, but he was loyal to Konoha and a good shinobi. He was compromised." Komaki sounded somewhat angry. "But they fought pulley, disregarding their own well-being and actually wanting to be hurt. They fought like berserkers or mad Inuzuka, not proper shinobi." Daichi stirred next to him. "He had no chakra in his body," he said solemnly, "only the blackness of that strange energy. From what I saw, it was holding them together, but when you damaged them, it began leaking out into the air. The more you damaged them, the more the blackness left their bodies. It's used to sustain them," Cage murmured. "Typical fatal attacks will likely prove to be ineffective, where blunt force trauma and physically damage attacks will probably be more effective." Yuka had taken out a small black book and was carefully writing down the general description and names of the shinobi they had just taken out. When she was done, she closed it and placed it back in her pouch. Cage pondered the bodies for a moment longer. "They most likely saw the flare," he concluded quietly. "Therefore, they must have been relatively close. Dispose of the bodies. We must catch up to them." Naruto burned the bodies with a fire technique, scorching flesh and bone and letting their charred remains sink into the ground. Then, he joined the rest of the team as they continued their pursuit of the enemy. The implications of the battle they had just fought were disturbing. Although the remnants of the traitorous patrol had shown a significant decline in combat ability, the fact that the enemy were able to brainwash a seasoned and experienced Jonin was worrying. Then there was the strange energy emanating off of the indoctrinated shinobi. According to Daichi, their chakra had been completely replaced by whatever that power was. Naruto couldn't see it, but he could feel it. It left chills down his arms and caused an uncomfortable prickling sensation in the pit of his stomach. Naruto had a few ideas what that was about, but now wasn't the time to think about it. Instead, he followed Cage's lead as the tall, silent captain led them through the forest. They leapt from one branch to another, the trees growing thicker and thicker the further they ventured into the Senju's ancient territory. Naruto had once read a theory that proposed the reason why the Uchiha had been so proficient with fire release techniques was because of an old, centuries-long plan to invade and destroy the heart of the Senju homeland. Looking around at the thick brush around them, Naruto concluded that liberal use of fire techniques would have had a devastating effect on the region. Although the battle hadn't taken very long, by the time they arrived at the destination Naruto knew that they had been too late. The chill in the air seeped through his cloak and into his skin as something prickled uncomfortably in his gut. Daichi flicked off a few hand signals and Cage nodded grimly. The squad captain led the team out of the dense brush and past the tree line, approaching a small, deserted town built on the edge of a river. The sun was lowering on the horizon, casting a brilliant orange and yellow glow over it, but it did little to hide the atmosphere of wrongness that clung to the town like an invisible, thick shroud. The town was much in the same condition as the village they had just come from. Things had been placed down or abandoned as if the residents had simply stood up and walked away. After seeing how powerful the unknown brainwashing technique was, Naruto supposed they had done just that. The street lamps remained unlit and doors and windows were open. This time, because of the town's proximity to the river, there were hundreds of footprints lining the muddied streets. They led to the river, over a small, wooden bridge and into a rough, makeshift path that led into the forest depths on the other side of the riverbank. Cage knelt down by the tracks, staring at them intently. He pressed on them with his fingers, measuring the depth, and then eyed the sun. His team stood around him, waiting patiently, while Cage made his conclusions. After a few moments, Cage nodded and rose to his feet. They have not been gone long, 20 to 25 minutes, Cage told them quietly. Naruto felt a blaze of determination well up within him. In Katsura village, their enemy had taken the entire night to ritualistically torture and slaughter the defenseless population. They had shown a great deal of interest in causing pain and suffering. This was good news for Team Cage. The citizens of this village could still be saved. The team leapt off of the road and began to follow the tracks that the civilians had made. However, before they had even left the village, Daichi had paused. Contact, he called out. Cage raised a hand and the team paused. Deceased, but there's lingering chakra. 400 meters at 2 o'clock. The team followed Daichi's directions, moving towards the west side of the small town. As they moved through the streets, Naruto looked on the horizon and saw the trees give way to a small hill at the end of the town. A large villa stood, framed by the sun slowly setting behind it. At this distance, he could see the rows of vineyards planted on the base of the hill and the large marble path leading up to the luxurious house. It must have been the estate of the noble in charge of this region. It was far too nice for a simple villager or worker. The squad closed the distance quickly and, at the base of that hill, they paused. They had found their first casualty. It was a man in his 30s, fierce grey eyes staring up at the sky blankly. His face had been contorted into grim anger and even acceptance of his fate, and he held the shattered remains of a halberd in his hands. He wore some kind of uniform, but it was hard to tell what it was, with the large chunk of flesh missing from his upper right side. The man's heart and everything around it was simply gone, his entire body stained crimson red. He lay back against a carriage of some sort, which showed evidence of an attack. It had been a nice carriage, too, with a splendid gleaming wooden frame and fine silk coverings over the broken windows. Now, it was barely more than a pile of firewood. A noble's guard, Komaki suggested quietly, having made some of the connections that Naruto had. Perhaps, Cage murmured, eyeing the body speculatively. But that uniform, I have seen that before. Naruto's eyes widened and he exhaled loudly. So have I, he murmured. His team turned to look at him as Naruto bent down, gingerly parting the bloodied scraps of cloth around the man's mangled chest and turning it around. It was soft, even soiled, and he picked up the unique emblem stitched into it. Naruto nodded grimly, his suspicions correct. This is one of the 12 guardians, he told Cage. What? Daichi exclaimed. He sounded shocked. One of the guardians, here. Cage said nothing as he bent down to examine the sash. As Komaki began to offer reasons why a guardian might be here, especially when the Fire Lord was in Konoha at the moment Naruto was still. His thoughts wandered back to the other day, when he met the Fire Lord. What they had talked about, he had made him tea and placed it on the desk. There had been a map with a route traced out. The carriage was one of the finest he had seen. The Fire Lord had said something about raising money motivation, to motivate the nobles, and then Naruto was there. Oh, shit, he breathed, his eyes widening. He stood, staring at the carriage in horror and hoping that he was wrong. Oh, shit. Report, Cage commanded quietly. I overheard a meeting between the Fire Lord and the Hokage, Naruto explained quickly. The Fire Lord was telling the Hokage how he planned to raise money to help rebuild Konoha. He mentioned that his daughter was touring some of the far-out regions, to ask the nobles for help. There was a map, he hesitated, his eyes fluttering shut as he tried to recall it. I can't remember exactly where the route went, but I'm positive that it's around this region. The squad absorbed what he had said. Toa summarized what they were all thinking. Oh, shit. Where are the rest of the guards? Komaki wondered. The princess wouldn't leave the capital without a contingent of samurai. Naruto turned to the villa on the hill. It was still a fair distance away, probably out of range of Daichi's Byakugan. Probably up there, he said grimly. And they might have been affected by the brainwashing technique like the lion was. Send a shadow clone, Kage ordered Naruto briskly. Naruto complied and his clone darted up the hill. Then, Kage turned back to the way they had come. Their attacks leading this way, he murmured. Only one pair of feet small, a young woman's they lead from this estate. We have to find her, Naruto said urgently. He remembered the Fire Lord, his strange mannerisms and odd way of talking and how he couldn't be read and how something intense had laid behind his eyes. The Fire Lord. He trailed off. It didn't have to be said. The Fire Lord would not react well to losing his only daughter. Wars had been started over less and the Fire Lord would find somebody to take his anger out on. Konoha, as the Land of Fire's largest military force, would be obliged to join him. It would be war. After the Blitz, Naruto never wanted to be in another war again. Let's go, Kage murmured. He seemed to share Naruto's thoughts. They followed the tracks, dashing past the town and delving into the untamed wilderness. Branches and shrubs had tried to claw back the little strip of path that the town's residents had created, but somebody had recently sliced away a lot of the offending plants. They continued following the tracks of the villagers, Kage occasionally pausing to stop for a few moments while Daichi rationed his use of the Byakugan. Not even the strongest Hyuga could maintain the activated state of the Eye bloodline indefinitely. It was during one of these stops that Naruto felt his shadow clone dispersing. His chakra shot back towards him at speeds far greater than any shinobi, shooting into the tenketsu around the back of his neck. His vision blurred for a few moments as the visual stimuli of the shadow clone was processed by his brain. Then, he grimaced. While it had not been as bad as Katsura village, the inside of the villa had not been pleasant. There seemed to have been a fight between the enemy and the bodyguards of the princess. The samurai had all fallen in the main foyer, while the staff and workers of the estate looked like they had been hunted down and slaughtered. There had been a rather obese man wearing fine clothes attempting to hide in the master bedroom, but he too had been killed, his head removed from his body. He told Kage, who processed the new information carefully. This is different from what we've been seeing, he murmured. The usual operation seems to involve brainwashing or tricking the civilians to come with them voluntarily. Here, the enemy actually attacked first, taking the estate by force. Perhaps the princess was their primary target, Komaki offered. Perhaps, Kage said, but he didn't sound like he agreed. Or perhaps she is merely a target of opportunity. The daughter of the Lord of the Land of Fire would be a valuable prize for many people. The discussion ended there. They continued on at top speed, following the tracks for another 5 minutes as it took them upwards up a great slope. Then a warning pulse flared through their Anbu tattoos. Naruto's eyes flickered back to Daichi as the cool wind rushed through his hair, watching as the Hyuga silently informed him of what he saw. Contact, 500 meters at 10 o'clock, multiple chakra signatures detected, low emissions, E rank, enemy presence detected. Kage changed course and they cleared the distance in a few moments. The journey took them over a ridge and they came out of the trees and they came to a stop on a rocky plateau. It was several hundred meters in length, hidden by the enormous trees that surrounded them. In the middle of the flat stretch of land was their enemy and their hostages and, for the first time, Team Kage got to see who they were truly fighting against. There were 14 robed figures standing on the tallest part of the plateau, their faces hidden from view by their masks. It was almost like a mockery of the Anbu mask, disfigured and demonic faces leering out into the world. They all held a bladed weapon of some kind, each unique and looking equally as spiky and painful as they last. Their black robes were mostly bare, except a single symbol on their chests. It was an inverted triangle surrounded by a circle. It had been painted on with a dark, crimson liquid blood, most likely, and it seemed to squirm and writhe on the fabric, as if it were alive. They stood over the villagers imperiously, looking down on them as if they were cattle. The villagers themselves stood in seemingly random spots around the base of that mound, their faces blank and their bodies relaxed. Only their eyes betrayed their thoughts on the matter, terrified and unable to comprehend what was happening to them. Whatever technique had been used to lure them up here, it looked like it only controlled the body and not the mind. There were two things that immediately stood out. The first was the giant wooden cross that had been planted in the middle of the plateau, where the enemy stood. Spread out along that cross was a bloodied woman covered in scraps of clothing. They might have been nice once and she might have been pretty, but it was hard to tell. She looked like she had been beaten, her clothes torn and her face bruised and swollen. Her hands and feet had been nailed to the cross with thick, iron bolts and she seemed unresponsive to anything around her. Her eyes were rolled to the back of her head and she was shaking madly. The second thing that stood out was the silver-haired man that stood right in front of them. He seemed young, in his 20s, and wore similar robes to the enemy up on the hill. He wore no mask and he held a large three-pronged scythe in his hand. His eyes stood out the most and, up until that point, they were the worst things that Naruto had ever seen. They seemed like a normal pair of eyes until Naruto stared past them. They were two foul beacons of depravity and pain. They were the eyes of somebody filled with an unholy flame. They were the eyes of somebody who looked out into the world and took delight at the misery and suffering of others. It was hard to describe, but as the man stared down at them, the unholy light in them burned brighter than any flame, the antithesis of the wall of fire. They were terrible because they were the eyes of a human, the worst of humanity embodied into a single individual. Before then, Naruto had had trouble comprehending what could possibly have motivated somebody to commit the atrocities that these people had. Now, after meeting the gaze of this man only once, he understood. This man did horrible, terrible things because he could. "Welcome, heathens," he called out mockingly, spreading out his arms. "Have you come to witness our celebration?" Kage had somehow produced his weapon the instant he had seen the man and his grip on it tightened. He said nothing, however, as Daichi let out a loud gasp, his hands flying up to clutch his head. He seemed lost of words. That man, nothingness, he is nothingness and nothingness is him, there's so much. Deactivate. Kage ordered harshly. Naruto didn't know if Daichi, with hands on his head, complied. Komaki and Toa were visibly shivering, their breaths leaving their masks in clouds mist. Yuka's had taken a step back while Kage's body language looked tense and uncomfortable. Naruto could feel a chill up his arms and a prickling in the pit of his stomach, but that was it. He glared at the man behind his mask, sending a pulse through his tattoo that seemed to stir his other teammates. The man looked puzzled for a few moments and then a terrible smile crossed his face. "This is fucking fantastic," he roared, gesturing at Naruto. He licked his lips, his eyes glinting madly. "Oh, Lord Jashin, you have blessed me today. I shall honor your name with this coming battle and offering the suffering and life of my enemy to your endless appetites." Naruto tensed, but the man frowned. Suddenly, his attitude abruptly changed and he scowled, looking quite sulky. "But first we must commence our harvest," he told them seriously. The sun was setting behind him, casting him in a hellish glow. "Our great lord cannot be kept waiting." Kage took a step forward. "Yes," he said stonily, "he can." "Blasphemy!" the man in front of them screamed. The volume was deafening as the silver-haired maniac raised his scythe. "Attack them, my pry!" His voice ended in a gurgle as Kage was suddenly beside him, his machete coming up and taking his head off of his shoulders. It did not deter the robed figures on the hill, and they shrieked and cried as they charged down at him, plowing through the frozen civilians. Naruto, Komaki and Toa darted forward to meet them. The blonde's hands flew as the first robed figure passed the motionless villagers, a crude, spiked axe swinging forward. Shadow clone technique. With a puff of smoke, 3 shadow clones appeared on all sides of the man, and at different heights, with kunai gleaming in their hands. The first, who was crouched down, slammed the blade in the back of the robed figure's knee. The second, at chest height, punctured the man's stomach and dragged the blade sideways. The third, appearing in the air at head height, dove his blade down into the man's skull with a two-handed blow. The man screamed and collapsed as the shadow clones collapsed and Naruto moved on to the next one. He ducked a swing, dodging the wild and careless attacks with ease. In hand-to-hand combat, Naruto's raw strength was mediocre at best, good for his age and stature, but nothing compared to a muscular adult. Instead of striking hard, Naruto focused on his speed and evasion of not getting hit and used weapons and tools to enhance his attacking power. This time, he held a loop of wire in his hands and managed to coil it around the man's arm. He leapt back, the wire in his hand, and made a single hand sign. Body flicker technique. In a short, sharp burst of movement, Naruto appeared behind the man, the wire still in his hands. The momentum of his sudden movement caught the enemy by surprise and his arm was almost ripped from his socket by the instant burst of force. He came rocketing back to Naruto, who weaved between the man's flailing limbs and coiled the wire around enemy's neck. Body flicker technique. Naruto used the same strategy again except this time with the man's neck. There was a loud distinctive crack as Naruto dropped the wire. On Naruto's right, Toa had slid past the defenses of his robed attacker, sliding a bright scarlet battle axe up the man's torso and splitting him in half in a spray of blood. Then, the chakra representation of the axe shimmered and suddenly Toa was holding a short sword, which drove into the throat of the next enemy he saw. There were flashes of crackling lightning and the hiss of Senbon sliding through the air as, behind him, Komaki made short work of one of her attackers. Yuka had thrown a gas bomb of some sort back from where they had arrived and two of the enemy in front of her attacked one another in a yellowish cloud of hallucinogenic poison before Kage dispatched them with the same devastating efficiency that he had taken down the leader. Naruto reached into his pouch and lobbed a trio of shuriken into the air. He made a sign, channeling chakra from his tenketsu and shaping it into an invisible billowing cloud around him. Shadow shuriken technique. He formed the technique and the chakra above him shimmered as hundreds of replicate shuriken appeared. A second later, he was cut down as two more demon-faced men swung their scythes at him. As his attackers were fooled by the genjutsu-laden replacement technique, Naruto appeared a short distance away in a crouch. Chakra pulled in his feet and he leaped up towards where he had just been standing, forming an unusual hand sign. Lightning release. Static pulse shot. Fire release. Great wave of flame. Lightning flickered around his dingers as he molded lightning elemental chakra, pushing it from the tenketsu in his fingertips. At the same time, he laid a buffering layer of neutral non-elemental chakra around it and molded fire elemental chakra above it, flooding the tenketsu around his throat. Fierce and heavy chakra engulfed his form, his other tenketsu releasing an enormous build-up of pent-up chakra and discharging it in the air around him, a sign of less than perfect chakra control. Nonetheless, the combination technique worked. The hundreds of shuriken, which were only now beginning to fall, were charged by a powerful streak of electricity that roared from his hands. At the same time, Naruto's chest swelled and he spat out a searing blast of heat down at them. The lightning-empowered shuriken were propelled by the raging wave of heat and slammed into the enemy, who had just realized that they had attacked a rock. The red-hot metal tore through the enemy with ease, bursting through their robes and flesh like a hot knife on butter. An instant later, the searing wave of heat engulfed them in a shimmering haze and they shrieked as their flesh blistered and cooked, eyes rolling into the back of their heads. They fell, twitching, as Naruto landed gracefully on the ground, his chakra raging all around him. The young Anbu had not forgotten how easily he had been defeated during the Blitz, nor had he slacked in his training the past month. Under the Hokage's training, Naruto had finally begun to show some success in the techniques and methods that had made the third Hokage the god of all shinobi. When he landed on the ground, the battle was over. The enemy, like the lion before them, had fought without care for their own well-being and had been no match for the skill of the Anbu. Report, Kage ordered as his team grouped up. 15 enemies identified, Komaki said darkly. All killed in action. Kage nodded. Well done, he said quietly. Toa, go and. You stupid fucks. Kage abruptly jerked and Naruto let out a strangled sound, disbelief clouding his mind. From its spot on the ground, meters away from his body, the lead priest glared at them hatefully, blood still oozing from his severed head. Naruto stared, dumbfounded, as the priest began shouting at them. If I fucking miss this ritual, I'm going to make the rest of your short fucking lives absolute hell. He roared with spittle and blood flying from his mouth. His eyes glowed with fervor. Lord Jashin stops for nobody. You stupid fucking weaklings aren't going to do jack shit to his designs. Komaki's hands blurred and a kunai slammed into the priest's severed head. The priest gurgled, eyes widening as it glimpsed the sizzling explosive note attached to the handle, and then disappeared under a small and compact explosion. The grade 3 explosive note detonated with a bang, sending gory chunks of flesh and brain flying through the air. Komaki withdrew her arm, radiating a sense of satisfaction, as Kage nodded approvingly. Make sure that you secure the enemy, he added unnecessarily. Some may have escaped death despite the damage caused. He trailed off, his breath creating a cloud of white mist as he exhaled. The chill in the air had increased and Toa and Komaki were both shivering madly. Kage was completely and utterly still while Yuka and Daichi flinched back. Although Naruto couldn't see the strange blankness that Daichi had talked about, it could definitely feel it. Bit by bit, from all over the graveyard, bits of flesh, bone and blood began to slide back to their bodies. The screams and shrieks Naruto had heard from the supposedly dying filled the air once more, and he abruptly realized that it was pleasure and not pain that they had been screaming of. The leader's head was first to regenerate, his head building up on his body bit by bit. When his skull was mostly formed, he staggered to his feet, regarding them with half a face. He said something, sounding raspy and distorted. His throat had still not been put back together, and raised his scythe. From all across the plateau, the robed priests began to rise up from the grievous wounds. Naruto was reminded of Shino and his regeneration techniques, but even the rogue Uzumaki had not shown anything like this. It was less like a healing technique and more like somebody reaching down and mashing flesh and bone together, like somebody with plasticine. The time is nigh. The leader gurgled. He raised his scythe as the sun almost finished setting behind him. Naruto's mask automatically adjusted to the different light levels, so he had barely noticed. Our sacrifice will begin. Then, almost as once, the civilians around them began to scream. His team were not responding, each frozen by the unholy chillness that had descended upon him despite the pulses Naruto continued to send through his tattoo. With a growl, his stomach prickling painfully, Naruto lunged forward and the half-repaired leader. The leader regarded him with soulless eyes and slammed the butt of his scythe on the ground. There was a terrible shriek and a blast of something. Blood rained down onto the ground as some of the nearest civilians simply imploded, sucked inwards into nothingness and leaving only their blood behind. As Naruto got closer, the screams became more and more coherent. Save us, please. What's this? What's going on? Help. Mummy. Frozen and unable to move, the men, women and children around them had been given the voices back. The leader had thrown his head back in relish, listening to them, and blocked Naruto's first swing of a kunai with his scythe. Sparks flew through the air as metal grated upon metal, the man looking down at Naruto cruelly. Listen well, heathen, he whispered. Some more screams were cut off and another terrible wail of power filled the air. My name is Hidden, the head priest of our glorious Lord Jashin. You can fight me all you want later, but for now, don't fucking interrupt. After the blitz on Konoha and in the aftermath of Team Sigma's battle against the S-ranked criminal Uzumaki Shino, Naruto had debriefed with Jiraiya of the Sannin. It had been a relatively quick rundown of the mission, what the team had encountered and how Naruto had proceeded. Jiraiya had listened intently and then redirected the conversation onto lighter subjects. After Tsunade had returned, Naruto had completed a comprehensive report on his actions and decisions during the village crisis. As he wrote it, hindsight had struck him hard and questions upon questions had filled his thoughts, but two stood out amongst them all. What if Naruto had kept Daichi and Kage with him during the battle against Shino? The added firepower of two more Anbu members and the insight that Daichi's eyes may have provided could have completely turned the tide of that battle. Perhaps, if Naruto had acted differently, Team Mantis may have survived, although he still didn't know what platoon that they had belonged to, and any questioning on his part had been shut down rather promptly. There was only one other question that plagued him more. What if Naruto had been able to access the power of the nine-tailed demon fox with greater ease? If he had been able to harness and control that unfathomable power within him, the fight would have gone much differently. Perhaps they would have been able to stop Shino before he had activated his weapon and wiped a large city and almost 100,000 people off of the map. He had voiced both questions to the Hokage. The old man had nodded thoughtfully, and then told him to stop wasting his time. What-ifs were of no use if they were just being used to agonize and doubt every decision. Instead, the Hokage had said, Naruto needed to focus on what he would do next time. He had gone further with an answer for his second question, adding that Naruto hadn't been trained in the use of the power of the nine-tailed demon fox because the chakra simply hadn't been available during his childhood. The fourth, Naruto was told, had been a sealing expert to the highest caliber. The seal that adorned his belly had locked away every hint of the bubbling crimson chakra deep within him, slowly purifying it and pumping it into his body. It had given him immense chakra reserves, which in turn boosted the Uzumaki longevity and endurance. But from what the third Hokage had been able to determine, the seal had not been designed to allow Naruto access to the demonic chakra while he was young unless he had come across a life-threatening situation. Then, fail-safes in the seal activated and Naruto could and had accessed and harnessed the power of the most powerful tailed beast. The seal had clamped down soon afterwards and the chakra was again out of his conscious reach. The seal would soon begin to slowly deteriorate. The one exposure to the foul, corrosive chakra of the nine-tailed demon fox had caused minor but irreparable damage that would eventually snowball into complete seal failure. The more that Naruto used the demonic chakra, the faster this process would occur. Naruto must have looked worried because the third Hokage had laughed, clapping him on the shoulder and saying that as long as Naruto didn't use the Kyuubi's chakra again, such an event was a decade away at least, and that the seal could be repaired and refreshed before that had happened. Now though, as the young, 13-year-old blonde boy pressed against the wicked, tri-pronged side of Hidden, the immortal priest of Jashin, he wished that he could once again call up that terrible power within him. All around him, men, women and children were bound by some kind of paralyzing technique, but still able to scream and plead and beg for their lives. Without any warning and almost seemingly at random, a random civilian would scream in agony and implode, their entire body disappearing into nothingness as their blood splattered everywhere around them. This only spurred on the sobbing and screams of the others and Naruto's ears rang as sparks flew through the air. Hidden was laughing maniacally and Naruto grunted as the slick, silver-haired man pushed back against him. His feet slid across the ground, his smaller frame unable to match the pure strength of the enemy. Then, Naruto heard the flutter of a cloak and the clang of metal meeting metal and Cage was suddenly there. His dull black blade slammed against the side, holding it there as the Anbu squad captain stood between Naruto and the enemy. Go, Cage said firmly. His voice was fierce as his body shook, somehow fighting off the terrible paralyzing and debilitating effects that had struck the Anbu team the moment they had entered the engagement. Directive 1. Directive number 1: to preserve the will of fire, to ensure the safety of Konoha's and the land of fire's citizens. Naruto nodded. He let his anger flow through him, drawing power off of it as he pressed against Hidden's side one last time. Then, after shifting his stance, Naruto used the enemy's weapon to push off away from him and leave the battle. He jumped through the air, landing in a crouch, and disappeared in a flicker of movement. He reappeared close to the nearest group of hostages and began to analyze them frantically. You're a strong one, Hidden roared. He sounded truly excited. My lord would dearly love your little soul. Come, Hidden, entertain us all. Metal clanged in the air and Naruto shifted his gaze for a moment. Hidden's side lashed out, bashing Cage away with incredible strength. The head priest was less like a shinobi and more like a berserker, howling and shrieking madly as he brought his weapon across again and again. There was little to no form or reason in the way he attacked, nor were there signs of any weapon stances. Instead, the priest seemed to rely on brute strength, his immortality and a never-ending supply of dirty tricks to overwhelm his opponents. Against many opponents, it would have been undoubtedly successful. Against Cage, the only member of the team who was faster than Naruto, it was like trying to watch a dog trying to chase his own tail. Hidden flailed about, the scythe whizzing through the air, while Cage dodged and weaved around it. He lashed out with his blade, neat and efficient cut slashing into Hidden's body as the experienced Jonin pushed past the enemy's meager defenses. He landed critical blows on vital points, forcing Hidden to concentrate fully upon him. The acolytes watched Hidden eagerly, many of them cheering and jeering. Whenever one of the trapped civilians imploded, they would gasp and moan in pleasure, their bodies shaking as they frothed at the mouth. This left Naruto alone with the civilians. The young Anbu knelt down on the closest one, a middle-aged woman. Her face was tanned and wrinkled, her eyes filled with tears as she sobbed openly. Naruto examined her carefully. Her foot were rooted to the ground, lines of little black symbols curled around her feet and digging into the soil. Naruto didn't touch them but he traced over them, looking as the symbols rose past her shoes, onto her legs and possibly all over her body. He had tried to push her off of the ground, but it had been like pushing against a stone wall. The one who pushed moved, not the wall. Please, the woman sobbed as Naruto growled under his breath, eyeing the strange little symbols furiously. He looked up at her, seeing her face crumpled with miserable acceptance. Please, forget about me. Save my chi. There was only a moment's warning of what was about to happen. The little black symbols coiled around skin contracted and her skin split apart. Then, before Naruto could even more, the woman in front of him imploded as the chain-like seal brought a terrible pressure down upon her. She let out the first note of a piercing scream as her body warped and contorted, being pushed into a single point in space, before she abruptly disappeared. Her blood remained and it exploded out from her in a shockwave of crimson fluid. Naruto flinched as it struck him. His mask was splattered, his clothes drenched. All around that one woman, at least a dozen more of her fellow villagers had also died, their blood falling to the ground. The orgasmic cries and shrieks of the acolytes boiled Naruto's blood, but he held it in, his will rooted in his mind. He jumped up and frantically moved to the next closest group of trapped civilians, distantly aware that his body was shaking. He knelt down, his hands glowing with molded fire elemental chakra as he tried to burn the seal away, ignoring the pained screams of the man above him. Mummy. The littlest boy of the group cried. He looked about 4 or 5. Snot dripped from his nose, he looked utterly devastated and inconsolable. Naruto snarled, removing his hands as the seals refused to budge. Even when he had sliced off the flesh with a flash of sharpened wind elemental chakra, the seals had merely tightened. He stood up, his chakra surging, and formed hand seals. Earth release, earth flow river. The ground beneath the man thickened and liquefied, but the men, women and children remained rooted to the ground, even as a river of mud swept away the puddles of blood and rocks around them. The sealing array merely went deeper and deeper into the earth. There seemed to be no way he could cut it off without as good as killing the civilians himself. The symbols almost glowed with a malevolent purple, something eldritch and arcane brushing up against him maliciously and whispering babbling nonsense in his ear, and Naruto felt a terrible chill in the air. The symbols stretched and pressed down on the limbs of the trapped and Naruto jumped back. Mummy. The little boy shrieked one last time before he, along with a dozen more, disappeared in a shower of blood. Naruto roared in frustration and moved on to the next group. This time, he was brutal with them, ignoring their screams of pain as he severed the feet. But the sealing script merely pulled the stump of the leg down onto the ground. This group disappeared almost a minute later and he moved on to the next group. This was a group of children, some younger than him and some his age, all wearing the clothes of the Land of Fire's public education system. They were all crying and weeping as Naruto desperately examined the seals. He couldn't make heads of tails. They began to stretch and the children shrieked. In desperation, Naruto palmed a kunai and thrust it directly into the sealing array below the young girl's foot closet to him. A flash of something blocked his vision and a coil of this terribly foul thing slammed into him. Naruto cried out as he was flung up and away from the group. He landed in a slump, his senses dazed but still acute enough to pick up the final piercing scream of the group of children before they were killed. His robe sizzled, in tatters, and his armor beneath glowed with heat, some parts twisted and melted. Naruto was gasping for air, shaking his head dazedly, as he slowly pulled himself across the muddy ground to the next group. He had to save them, he had to save as many as he could. But, in the end, Naruto had not been able to save even one person. His efforts had been in vain and he stood there amongst the blood-soaked rocks, the crimson liquid flowing off the tattered remains of his black cloak. He was panting madly, his eyes almost feverish, as his chakra grumbled within him. Behind him, Hidden roared furiously, cackling madly as he beat back Cage, heedless of the damage the Jonin did to him. Despite Cage's advantage in speed, Hidden outmatched him in stamina and durability, and the silver-haired man was grinning madly as he forced Cage back again and again. The other acolytes were coming too, rousing from their last pleasure-induced seizure. There were no more massacred civilians to occupy them, although the Fire Lord's daughter was still nailed to the cross. Naruto ignored them, his chakra raging within him, as he took a step forward towards Hidden. He channeled his chakra through his body, pausing before it left the tenketsu, layering it again and so forth 6, 7 times more than he had ever done before. The dense, explosive pressure burst from him and the ground quaked and rumbled. Little bits of stone rose up, crumbling into dust, the bloody puddles around him rippled and the air was hazy. Hidden noticed immediately and grinned manically. What a scary boy. He screamed madly, Cage forgotten. He raised his scythe and gestured at Naruto threateningly. Come on, heretic. Fight in the name of the great Lord of Suffering. Sarutobi Hiruzen was renowned throughout the elemental countries as the god of shinobi. He had many other monikers. In the Land of Fire, he was known as the Professor, the genius who had mastered every single technique ever produced in Konoha. He was also less commonly known and referred to as one of the 3 pillars of the Old World, alongside the third Chuchikage, Onoki of both scales, and Hanzo the Salamander. These three old men wielded incredible power and, individually, were able to lay waste to entire armies. Onoki of both scales was a master of the infamous dust release techniques, able to pulverize his enemies into molecular-sized dust. During his greatest battle against the Third Hokage, Onoki reputedly destroyed an entire island, his dust techniques turning it into powder. Hanzo the Salamander was a master of close combat. Combined with his expertise in kenjutsu, his finesse with water release techniques and the extraordinarily potent poisons he could transfer with a single touch, Hanzo had single-handedly kept the land of Rain an independent state for over 40 years. Sarutobi Hiruzen, with mastery in all forms of shape and elemental manipulation, had an entire library to draw on during his battles. In his younger years, the Third Hokage was said to have had a chakra presence that dwarfed any other capable of going toe-to-toe with any Jinchuriki and Kage in the world. With a seemingly unique ability to form and combine multiple techniques all at once, Sarutobi had been a one-man army, capable of producing combination techniques that ordinarily would have needed entire teams of shinobi. Naruto was the Third Hokage's protégé. He had begun to training that Sarutobi had undergone when the Hokage had been young. He had a decent knowledge of many elemental techniques and had extensive training at manipulating all forms of elemental chakra. Unfortunately, Naruto did not have the control needed to mimic his mentor's style of fighting as of yet. Fortunately, the Third Hokage had worked with him in overcoming his limits in this area, and together they had come up with a process that allowed Naruto to create devastatingly powerful combination techniques. That was why as Naruto walked towards Hiden, his chakra surging in his body furiously, his tenketsu almost sizzling as the air around him shimmered and shuddered, the very first technique he used was the shadow clone technique. A dozen puffs of smoke burst around him as replicas of Naruto's cloaked and masked form appeared. With a quick flick of his hand, Naruto directed most of his clones at Hiden while those left began to make seals. Hiden roared and laughed as the shadow clones darted around him, lashing out with their weapons. While Naruto was an A-ranked shinobi, he was also young, only 13, and he had a comparatively small stature. In hand-to-hand combat, Naruto was never going to win in pure strength. As such, he relied on his speed and his skill in weapons, and while the shadow clones weren't able to match Hiden's raw physical strength, they were able to dodge his furious swipes. Kunai plunged into vital points, one shadow clone ducking a side swing and coolly inserting the cool metal blade in the back of the enemy's knee, while another jammed it into the head priest's spine. Hiden merely laughed, and with a quick brandish of his weapon moving much faster than before, he dispelled the shadow clones around him with a crazed smile on his face. "You weakly," he began. The two shadow clones that had stayed with their creator had finished weaving their hand signs. Each clone had been given enough chakra to create their single ninjutsu. As the clones finished their techniques, they dispelled in puffs of white smoke as their chakra saturated the air around where they had been standing. Earth release, earth flow river. Wind release, great wind breakthrough. Fire release, blazing river. The earth around Hiden liquefied and became a raging river, rocking the Jashinist around furiously. The silver-haired man gave an unexpected yelp as he lost his footing and sank in the mud. The wind around him howled furiously, wind elemental chakra roaring forward and pushing a gigantic wave of mud with it. At the same time, the last of the techniques set the river of mud alight and the soil blackened and glowed, noxious smoke rising into the air as the mud became tar. Hiden was swept under by the black, bubbling liquid, his manic laughs cut off as he went under. The river of mud began to settle, the heat leaving almost instantly as the chakra that fueled it began to disperse. There was a rising chill in the air as Hiden burst free from the cooling ground, his cloak in tatters and his skin blackened and blistered. He howled in ecstasy, shuddering madly as his skin began to flake off, but he was cut off as a sharp spear of rock shot from the ground and impaled him in the throat. He gurgled, desperately clutching at the offending object, and disappeared underneath a hailstorm of metal as a shuriken shadow clone technique rocketed through the air. An instant later, the same unsettling chill returned and the wounds and pieces of Hiden were dragged back to their owner, like there was some unnatural form of gravity at work. The air was still. Naruto could barely hear anything as his body thrummed with chakra. His chakra was wound tight around his body, layered upon each other to create a dense field that gave his techniques more burst. His mind, still reeling from what he had just experienced, was eerily focused. Hiden was a monster. He would not survive. Naruto would make sure of it. The ground quaked and the air seemed to shudder as chakra exploded from Naruto's tenketsu. The dense chakra fueled Naruto's powerful techniques as he became an unrelenting, unstoppable force of nature. For the next few minutes, Hiden was unable to react at all as Naruto tore into him with vigor. The ground exploded in giant geysers of earth and shrapnel, ripping through the silver-haired man's chest and face. Great streaks of fire lit up the sky, tearing Hiden apart again and again. Plumes of smoke rose up into the air as shadow clones burst into existence, their hands flashing, and disappeared in puffs. Naruto weaved signs, his fingers never pausing, as he formed deadly techniques again and again and again. Lightning release, electromagnetic murder. The ground was torn apart, soil and earth whipping up as a crackling discharge of glowing bluish lightning attacked Hiden from underneath, the piercing bolts ripping into his ankles and knees. Flesh sizzled and bones exploded, only to be forcefully pulled back together a second later. Earth release, Titan's fist. The cratered and rubble-strewn earth rumbled as a giant fist of stone rose up and grabbed the dazed Hiden before the enemy had a chance to react. Deep within the ground something rumbled ominously. Naruto's chakra roared furiously through the stone construct as the slab-like fingers began to squeeze. The newest of Naruto's techniques and one that Sarutobi had decreed was one of his strongest once fully mastered seemed like it would bind Hiden. But Hiden screamed. The terrible screeching noise filled the air and the earth around the entombed priest cracked and fell apart. An instant later, a great wall of fire had enveloped the shattered remains of Naruto's construct. The combination technique howled as it created a backdraft, hungrily devouring the air around it as it grew larger and larger. Then, it too fell apart as an unseen, spine-chilling shockwave of something foul tore through the air. Naruto's fingers continued to blur, his breathing deep and steady. His tenketsu were hot and his body felt strangely light, like he was made of air. Clones popped into existence and disappeared an instant later. His hands never rested, his chakra flowed freely and his tenketsu burned in his veins. Combinations of techniques that would have required whole teams to perform were done by a single individual. Chakra that surpassed that of Konoha's most elite Jonin was used with reckless abandon. For what seemed like eternity, Naruto tore into Hiden with the full force of his arsenal. The ground trembled, large swathes of the surrounding forest toppling over as the earth was violently torn apart from powerful earth and fire techniques. Trees disappeared under searing red-hot blazes of fire, thick, black smoke rising into the air. The winds howled, steam rose from the cracked and blistered ground and trees disappeared underneath raging infernos. It was the legacy of the god of shinobi, the skill set and sheer power that had made the third Hokage considered one of the most powerful shinobi of all time. It was a possible future of the right hand of God, a glimpse into what one day could become a legend. Against Hiden, it was ineffective. The man simply would not die. Fire burst into existence, fueled by Naruto's raging chakra. It danced hungrily over Hiden's body, trying in vain to devour the tainted and unholy flesh. But, as quick as the fire consumed the flesh was it put back together, blackened, cracked and steaming but still whole. Even when combined with a wind technique, the flame was not hot enough to incinerate Hiden before he could recover. Hiden would not be put down with the flame. Shadow clones burst into existence as Naruto trapped Hiden again with his arsenal of earth techniques. The young Anbu rendered his enemy limbless with, tearing his arms and legs off of his torso with wind-natured chakra. 4 clones grabbed a limb each and sprinted as quickly as they could away from the battlefield. But the grasp of whatever power or technique that Hiden was wielding would not be deterred and the limbs were summoned back to their bodies, the shadow clones dragged helplessly behind. He tried decapitating Hiden, but the head also flew back to the body, laughing and cackling all of the way. The earth rose around Hiden and Naruto entombed him within a solid prison of rock. He layered the technique with earth-natured chakra, strengthening the rock until it was as hard and thick as a castle wall. The prison of stone lasted for a full 10 seconds. Then, cracks appeared and, even though Naruto concentrated with all of his might, large slabs fell off of the mound and the construct collapsed as Hiden remerged, looking none worse for wear. There was always the possibility of drowning him, but Naruto didn't know any water techniques that could produce enough liquid. He briefly entertained the idea of dropping him in some kind of acid but he lacked any techniques or liquids that he could use. Apart from the 2 lightning techniques, Naruto didn't know anything that seemed like it could put a dent in the man. Fire, wind, earth, water, lightning, all had failed. Kunai, shuriken, explosive tags, none had worked. Nonetheless, the time Hidden took recovering from each attack was time spent not attacking Team Cage, and Naruto continued the assault, even though he was out of ideas. Hidden's body reformed and stitched back together every time. Naruto tore him to shreds and something forced flesh, blood and bone back into a cohesive whole. The unholy power settled down on the blonde Anbu's shoulders, an oppressive, terrible weight that chilled him to the bone, and something in the pit of his stomach prickled uncomfortably. The battle seemed to be at a stalemate. Hidden hadn't even landed a single attack on Naruto, he hadn't even taken a step forward. Naruto's devastating barrage of ninjutsu had completely and utterly overwhelmed the cultist. Amidst the rumble and roars of the elements, Hidden's laugh could be heard. He laughed, shrieked and praised his god as he was torn apart, seemingly ecstatic at the opportunity to experience such pain and suffering. He cried in pleasure as Naruto tore him apart again and again and again. Distantly, he was aware of the rest of Team Cage fighting against the rest of the cultists. His fellow Anbu had been roused or dispersed the techniques that had muddied their minds and stilled their bodies. He had almost forgotten about the rest of the enemy, but Cage and the rest dealt with them efficiently. Like Hidden, the other cultists reformed after every attack, but it seemed slower for them, although they made up for it with their numbers. Naruto focused on the leader of the enemy, gritting his teeth and panting as his tenketsu burned. For the third time in the past month, Naruto felt completely useless. Shino had decimated them, his regeneration negating all of the damage, much like Hidden was. He had been worse than the cultist though, his attack power far higher and deadlier. Tsunade had crashed through them with ease. Although she was an ally and a shinobi of Konoha, Naruto had no doubts that the member of the legendary three could have wiped him out with ease had she truly been an enemy. Now there was a third, another who seemed impossible to stop. Like Shino, Hidden simply didn't care about the damage he received, he seemed to welcome it. Like Shino, Hidden was truly abnormal, his healing and regeneration barely human. He would undoubtedly be classed as S rank, and Naruto had always known that the third Hokage was a veritable monster in the arts of battle. Like Tsunade, like Shino, like Sarutobi, Hidden was on a completely different level. Was this the power of S rank, to transcend the limits of what was human and what was not? A part of Naruto wryly acknowledged that it was the same ability that once again had undermined him. When or if he got back to Konoha, he would find a way to get around a regeneration-based opponent. Hidden was sent flying as a combination of lightning release, electromagnetic murder and earth release. Seismic upheaval tore him apart, and it gave Naruto some time to breathe. He was gasping for air, sweat trickling down his face, and his entire body felt hot and sluggish. He struggled to move for a moment, and then realized that the ground beneath his feet and cracked and blistered the chakra he had been emitting from his tenketsu, heating up the soil and hardening it. How could he defeat Hidden? His mind raced, and again he was struck by the similarity between Hidden and Shino. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, that dark, forbidden thought rose up. Could he use the power of the nine-tailed demon fox again? But he didn't know how to access it, and, during a brief respite, he searched deep within his body to find a glimmer of that strange, dark chakra. All he got was the uncomfortable prickling sensation at the pit of his stomach and nothing else. Naruto briefly entertained the idea of letting Hidden strike him, perhaps a near-lethal blow would set the seal in motion. But he discarded it just as quickly as it had come. It was too risky and there was no guarantee that it would work. As Hidden was sucked underneath a glowing black river of tar, Naruto panted, his thoughts racing as he desperately tried to think of a strategy or technique that could help him. None came to mind. He lacked information. He always lacked information. Then he paused. Intelligence was an important asset, perhaps the most important, and Naruto couldn't beat Hidden because he didn't know how the cultist's power worked. He made a sign and a shadow clone appeared. It disappeared almost instantly as Naruto turned back to Hidden, forming another sign and beginning his assault on the immortal cultist again. Naruto's shadow clone had been designed to transmit auditory information back to its creator. While the clone itself had all of its senses, Naruto had no need for the visual or tactile stimuli that the clone had experienced. It wasn't a very energetic clone, made with just enough chakra to keep it moving, and its personality was barely half formed. Had the clone's mask been off, there would have been no doubt that it was a fake. Nonetheless, it was a skilled fake and avoided a swing from the nearest cultist. It scrambled back on the ground, flipping over a reforming cultist and using its pitiful chakra reserves to dart away. A second later, Daichi was there and the Hyuga delivered an expert jab to the back of the cultist's head. The cultist simply collapsed in a heap, frothing at the mouth, allowing Naruto's clone to approach the Hyuga. The blow to the cultist wasn't going to kill him, but it gave Daichi a respite and he turned to the clone expectantly. Daichi. The clone's voice was blank and lacked any emotion. I have been sent to gather information. I need to know more about the enemy's power. I can't see it, Daichi replied. He reached into his cloak and flung a trio of shuriken at the cultist on the ground, who was beginning to stir. There's something there, but it's like he hesitated. It's like it's in the corner of my eye, but whenever I turn to look at it, it's gone. I have been sent to gather information. I need to know more about the enemy's power. The clone repeated his words in the exact same tone and Daichi sighed. I can't see it, he said, grimacing. He looked like he was struggling with something. It hurts to look. There's something there and everything inside of me is telling me I don't want to see it. I have been sent to gather information. I need to know more about the enemy's power. The clone's voice didn't change, but it was somehow more insistent. Daichi shakes his head and takes a deep breath. Fine, he reluctantly obeyed. I'll give it another go. The real Naruto had once again torn Hiden to shreds as Daichi turned his head to watch. There was no indication that the Hyuga had activated his Byakugan until he began talking, his voice soft, almost monotone. It's just like I said, I can't see it. It's a mass of nothingness, Daichi struggled to explain. It just surrounds him, infuses with the broken parts and puts it all back together. He was beginning to shake. It takes some of the energy to restore them, there might be less of it. I don't know, I can't tell, but I'm sure that it takes some of whatever it is to heal. Naruto's clone considered that. Suggestions? It asked, almost sardonically, the first traces of emotion appearing. Keep beating him up. Daichi shrugged. That energy's gotta run out sometime. I guess we'll just have to see what lasts longer, your chakra or his powers. Naruto's clone nodded. Thanks, it said. Daichi ignored it. His voice was lowering, becoming an almost inaudible whisper. But there's something there, he breathed. Something I don't want to see, something in the corner of my eye. If I just twist it like this, I could. His head cocked and he paused. Then, he jerked back. I see it, he whispered furiously. I see it all, oh, shit. There's a face, I see it, Naruto. The clone paused as it was about to disperse. What? He asked. It's looking at me, Daichi whispered. His head seemed to be frozen. The Hyuga let out a strange giggle. It's looking at me. The all-seeing eyes of the Hyuga stared into the abyss and something stared back. The clone was a limited kind, just enough chakra to transmit a set of stimuli back to its creator. In a way, it was almost brain-dead, lacking the emotion and much of the thought patterns of the original. Yet, deep within the limited chakra-based construct, something flinched in worry and the clone hesitantly placed a hand on the frozen Hyuga's shoulder. Daichi suddenly jerked back as if struck and blood began to ooze from the corners of his mask. My eyes. He moaned piteously. The clone quickly took off the mask. Daichi was oozing blood from all orifices, his ears, nose, mouth and eyes. He seemed delirious, sweat beading on his forehead. His once pure white eyes were now shaded gray, dull and lifeless, and the Hyuga shook. As Daichi began to seize and shudder, Cage was there and the clone took the chance to disperse itself. Naruto received the stream of chakra and processed the new sensory stimuli. Daichi had seen Hiden use the strange power to heal himself, but no power was infinite. His path was set. Naruto would kill Hiden and force him to regenerate again and again, until there was no more of the strange power to draw on. The plan was crude, but Naruto felt a weight lift off of his shoulders, his doubts fading. There was a strategy now. A moment later, Hiden emerged from the latest whirlwind of fire. His skin was blackened, cracked, his eyes scorched and oozing, and his clothes all gone. Yet, he looked absolutely furious and spittle flew from his cracked lips. One does not look upon the face of Lord Jashin. He screamed. He reached out and his fallen side leapt into his hands, strangely undamaged by the techniques that Naruto was employing. Heathen. Heretic. Blasphemer. You dare. Hiden launched the side away from Naruto and towards where he knew where Daichi was. He channeled chakra into his hands, wind nature taking form in his sword Tenketsu, and the scuff was blown back by a buffet of wind. A second later, Naruto formed a hand sign and tapped the ground with his foot. Rows of sharp, rocky spikes burst from the ground and slammed into the raging cultist. He ignored them all, pinned as he was, and he screamed into the heavens. Lord Jashan, the heretic have trespassed in your domain. Bear down your utmost fury and smite them from this world. May the eyes boil and melt of all those who gaze in that which must not be gazed. May the mind break of all those who think of that which should not be thought about. May the ears of those who listen to what should not be listened to deafen and die. The words made no sense to Naruto, but the chill in the air intensified. Hiden began chuckling, his skin beginning to take back its creamy color as new eyes formed in his sockets. Another, he shrieked. Another has gazed upon your work. He frothed at the mouth. Show her the truth. Show her the only truth there is. From the other side of the battlefield, Yuka screamed. Naruto sent a crackling bolt of electricity at Hiden, who convulsed as it splashed across his broad chest. The earth spears were beginning to crack and break apart, but the lightning technique kept the cultist occupied for a moment as Naruto turned around, his eyes seeking out his teammate. Yuka was on her knees, her hands clasping both sides of her head. No, 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 no. She chanted endlessly. Stop it, stop it, stop it, don't look at me. The cultists around the fallen Yamanaka lunged at her, but Komaki was suddenly there. She flung a pair of kunai at the first cultist, sending him sprawling backwards, and made a hand sign. The kunai suddenly exploded in a puff of white smoke and loops of wire burst forward, which wrapped around the next two cultists like snakes. Lightning arced through it and the cultists screamed with pleasure as they convulsed. Hiden roared, and for the first time Naruto took a step back as the silver-haired man went on the attack. The stone spikes that had him pinned in the air collapsed and he shrugged off the lethal lightning attack as if it was nothing. His scythe appeared in his hand and he threw it at Naruto with tremendous force. The blonde Anbu barely blocked it with a pair of kunai, but he successfully parried it, the scythe bouncing back, and then suddenly it went flying past Naruto as Hiden tugged on the rope attached to the handle. In that split second, Naruto channeled sharpened wind-natured chakra into his kunai and flung it at the rope. The glow surrounding the kunai spluttered and faded. The metal was not chakra conductive and Naruto was not skilled enough with wind to compensate, and the kunai bounced off of the thickened rope. At the same time, the scythe lashed out towards Komaki and it almost seemed like it was going to hurt her. But Toa had been watching and he stood between the weapon and his teammate, barely blocking the scythe with a glowing scarlet shield emanating from his right arm. It had not been a perfect block, blood dripped from his arm and his robe was torn, but the scythe rebounded off of the shield and Hiden tugged it back into his hand. Perfect. Hiden howled, the scythe returning to his hand. A splatter of blood decorated the tri-pronged tip of the curious weapon and the cultist's eyes were practically glowing as he bent down and licked Toa's blood off of the weapon. I was just thinking that Lord Jashan needed a sacrifice. Before Naruto's eyes, his skin began to turn black. It wasn't from any fire or explosion, and Naruto watched with horrified fascination as the man in front of him changed. His skin had taken on a deep, unnatural shade of black and something shifted underneath it. Bulges of white pressed up against the flesh and Naruto realized that Hiden's bones were tearing out of his body. The power in the air was numbingly cold and the Anbu's breath came out of his mask as a mist. Let the ritual begin. Hiden howled. Naruto made a move to stop him, but before he could, the cultist seemed to explode in a shower of blood. It rained from every orifice, every exposed part of the silver-haired man's skin, splattering onto the charred and broken ground in large splotches. Naruto frowned, taking a defensive stance as Hiden staggered around, his feet dragging in the blood and his head bowed. Had one of his teammates done something? Then, Hiden's head rose and a maniacally grin had crossed his face. The blood around him was coalescing, Naruto suddenly realized, forming the eerie circular enclosed triangle that had decorated the factory in Katsura village. He lunged forward but was intercepted by an acolyte, who swept at him with a spiked mace. Hiden was laughing as he reached up, a black spear suddenly appearing in his hands. It radiated a sense of foulness truly surpassing anything that Naruto had experienced so far, and as the young Anbu dispatched the acolyte around him, Hiden brought his tip of the spear against his forehead and slowly carved a path through his own head. Above the screams and howls of the other cultists, Naruto heard Toa let out an audible grunt. He turned his head and saw Toa stagger back, holding his mask. Hiden laughed cruelly and his spear flashed again as the slick-haired man slammed it into the crook of his elbow. Toa shuddered and the bright scarlet weapon he was holding faded. Blood dripped from the sleeve of his cloak and he staggered back, holding the crook of his elbow while delivering a vicious kick to a nearby cultist. Naruto made the connection almost instantly, but there was no time to warn his teammates. His eyes widened as Kage came flying forward, having dispatched the last of his enemies at the moment. The Jonin's blade glinted in the air as Naruto lunged forward. "Wait!" he cried out. Kage stilled in his movements, halfway through a devastating blow at Hiden's heart, and Naruto disappeared into the fastest body flicker he had ever pulled off. The dull black blade swished through the air, the momentum too strong for Kage to stop, and it thrust into Hiden's seemingly defenseless body. A sudden howling wind rose up into the air, drowning out the battlefield noises. Hiden's eyes rolled into the back of his skull, his tongue out, a look of absolute pleasure on his face, and Kage's blade lodged in his chest. Behind them, Toa held a hand to his chest. He seemed frozen for a split second, still not comprehending what was happening, but he pitched forward and fell face first onto the ground. Toa twitched and then fell still. Hiden's laughter roared into the night sky. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.